Wine looked around the mansion as they entered. Jungkook gazed at her coldly and placed her luggages down. Jungkook called one of his maids. The maid nodded her head and led her upstairs into another room, which was filled with all kinds of stuff like clothes, painting, music instruments, which she loved. She informed her politely. Mrs. Min bowed at her and left her alone. Wyan looked around, taking in beautiful decoration of the room. She said angrily while walking to the closet to pulling out some of her night dresses to wear. Sudden knock on door made her sigh. She asked why and rolled her eyes. Wyan sat annoyed. Mrs. Min sighed. She warned. She scoffed. She stated bluntly. She spoke annoyed. She trailed off. She grumbled under her breath. She uttered, and she left. After a few moments, the door of her room wide open, revealing Jungkook with a cold face. She wasn't bothered to look at him, which triggered his anger more. He asked. She replied annoyed. Vine scoffed at his word and looked at him. Jungkook smirked and took his step closer to her, making her frown. He smiled proudly, making her frown deeper. Jungkook raised his voice at her. She replied angry, making Jungkook smirk even wider. He said slowly, getting near her. She threatened. He challenged. Jungkook held her wrist and twisted it lightly behind her back. Wyan yelped in pain and closed her eyes. He demanded. Wyan opened her eyes and glared at him. She pulled her wrist away. He grabbed her wrist again and pulled her towards himself. They stood there facing each other. Jungkook was staring deeply into her eyes, searching for an answer inside her eyes. He didn't know what kind of thoughts were going through her mind. He was so dominated and knew how to work in the situation. Vine sighed and nodded her head before sliding her gown down, showing him her wand on her shoulder. Jungkook placed his fingers on the wand, making her close her eyes in pain. He sighed and made her sit on the bed before grabbing first aid kit. Jungkook sat beside her, examined the wand gently. He dabbed alcohol on the wound to clean the blood before wrapping the wound with bandage. When Jungkook finished, he sighed. He said, she said while getting up quickly and headed to the bathroom. Jungkook got up and rolled his eyes before heading out of the room. Namjoon looked at Jungkook surprisingly while others were stunned to speak. He said curiously. Jungkook glanced at him, trying not to make eye contact. He answered. Taehyung just looked at him. He didn't know how to respond to this. Yonggi questioned. Jungkook just shrugged. Jungkook looked at him and thought for a moment. Namjoon and Hyosok glanced at him before nodding. He spoke softly. He asked. He replied. He stated. Jungkook nodded his head, smiling at everyone. Mingyu hung up the call and glanced at Ryan. Ryan nodded her head. She spoke bitterly and sat on the couch. He said as he passed her the glass of the wine. She stared while drinking the wine in one go. He said worriedly. She responded. She gulped down the rest of the glass before looking at Mingo. She whispered. He grinned at her. Ryan nodded and leaned against the couch, closing her eyes. She requested. She was tired after having a hard day. He nodded and left. Jungkook plopped on the couch and sighed deeply. He said as she gave him the glass of water. He inquired. Jungkook's expression changed in a cold one. He nodded his head and Mrs. Min left from there. He muttered. He stared intensely at the window and waited for her arrival. After some time, he heard the sound of a car parking in front of the mansion. Soon Ryan entered the mansion, losing her hair, which was tied in a ponytail, as she wore a black dress which hugged her curve tightly and showed her perfect figure. Her bare feet stepping on the polished floor and echoed throughout the mansion. Jungkook sucked his sharp breath as she was looking very beautiful. His heart started beating wildly at seeing her like this. She sat and went to the kitchen. Jungkook snapped out of his desk, cleared his throat before walking towards her. He asked extremely. She simply replied. He growled angrily. She glared at him and turned around to leave the kitchen, but he grabbed her wrist roughly and pulled her to face him. He asked again, trying to keep his composure. She rotated angrily. He exclaimed angry. Jungkook released her wrist harshly and left.